Good evening and welcome to tonight's episode of Ask Leah. Tonight I'm discussing storytelling because I received a question from a leader and they said, I've heard you and others talk about the importance of storytelling in leadership, whether it's communicating a change or really strengthening any communication. And I'm not really sure what people mean when they say tell stories. So I thought I would address that tonight because storytelling is hugely powerful when it comes to communication. Why? Because it evokes an emotional response, an emotional connection. And in fact, there's an old sales adage which says, facts tell, stories sell. Okay, if you just have a presentation or a message that is just fact-based and logical, it might make sense, but it doesn't really connect with people, and that's where storytelling comes in. Now, we are not talking about whopping great stories. I'm not saying that you get up at your next meeting and you say, once upon a time, and you take people through some big sequential story. When we talk about storytelling, it might be a snapshot, it might be a fragment of a story, it might be an example to make it real. For those of you who have read my books, either Soft is the New Hard or Steer Through the Storm, you will know they are peppered with stories. All of my talks are peppered with stories because they make things real. So let me give you some examples of this. If you're navigating change, it might be a story about how another organisation handled change or maybe didn't handle change. The old classic that gets brought up because it is a powerful story again and again when it comes to adaptability and change is the story of the brand Kodak and how they weren't willing to adapt to change. And they pretty much don't exist now after being one of the biggest companies in the world because they didn't adapt to and adopt digital photography. Recently in a workshop with the power industry where we're talking about closing a power station and mine and how to really encourage people to work well and take pride in what they do until that final closure. We spoke about Holden and Ford Motor Companies here in Australia and how they really got the pride of the workforce to really think about the contribution they'd made to the country and to be able to walk out at the end with their heads held high, and how in the power industry you've powered the state of Victoria for the last however many decades. You want to go out knowing that you did that and with that pride, and by tying it to what Ford and Holden did, it makes it real. Instead of just saying the words, it makes you see, oh, this can be done. It might be highlighting a customer, and instead of just talking about your customers in general, it might be highlighting to your team, this was the experience one customer had and here's the impact we had on their life because of the way we communicated with them or the customer service we delivered. Suddenly it becomes real. During change, it might be, as I said, highlighting what you don't want to have happen, and I won't name names on that one, but we do that in some of my workshops. We look at what organisation hasn't dealt with change well and why, and how did that shape up? And people share the stories. In a workshop last week, I asked the leaders in the room for examples of where bad news had been delivered with real empathy, and one of the attendees told this really amazing story about a leader who'd had to make their whole team redundant, and they were actually becoming redundant too, but about how this leader really showed care and compassion and helped everyone get their resumes in order, and how even though it was a really sad process, people walked away with their heads held high. I also had a leader in that same workshop, and if you're watching, you know the story I'm about to share here, but shared the most horrendous story of when bad news was delivered, and they gave an example of where everyone was given their envelopes which said whether they were redundant or not in a group meeting setting. So you've got people opening their envelopes, finding out that they're safe, and other people finding out in that group setting that they were made redundant. That's how not to communicate change well. Can you see, even by those examples, you go, whoa, that's horrendous, or wow, that was done with compassion. Now, I could have just said it's really important to communicate bad news with compassion, but it wouldn't have had the punch as it does when I share those stories. So, leaders watching, anyone who's trying to communicate an effective message watching, how can you integrate storytelling into your delivery to make it real, to make it powerful? Because I guarantee if you do, your message is much more likely to connect, get that emotional reaction, and be heard. If you've got a communication, leadership, change leadership, self-management, people skill question, soft skill question you would like answered, send it through and I will do my best to answer it for you next week. Cheers.